No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about the hiring process.
That's always fun.
It is. And we've talked about the hiring process before in other episodes, but there's something specific that I want to talk about right now. And this is the length and kind of quality of the hiring process. I want to talk about this because I've seen a number of LinkedIn posts recently where people have kind of openly complained about how long the hiring process is in some organizations. Like someone ranted that, they were called to schedule their 5th interview, and at that point they said, I'm gonna go ahead and pass. This is too long a process. And if I look back over the course of my career, it's definitely a thing that the hiring process has gotten longer. Like we've added steps to it seemingly. It's also a thing that it seems like as people job hop or take steps to leave organizations, go to different organizations more often in their career, they've had less of a tolerance for this kind of thing. Meaning if you're going to interview with an organization, once every 10 years, who cares if it takes 2 months and 10 interviews? But if you're doing this potentially every couple of years, it can be a tough thing to kind of integrate into your life if, your next job or next company takes so much time, trying to hire you. What are your thoughts about this? Have you seen any pushback or any problems with the hiring process getting as long as it is?
Yeah, well, I think there's an intent in a lot of leaders that I talk to across multiple industries where kind of this idea of, as you're connecting with potential candidates, giving them an opportunity to meet more people at the company, that then allows you to have more. I would not even say the word decision makers, because a lot of the people that I talk to are like, this is the process. So like if the process is somebody's going to talk to 3 or 4 or 5 people, but they're not making any decision, they're just simply sharing, their thoughts or perspective or insights or whatever, or just connecting with potential candidates, then it's not really like a process. It's more of like a connection. Mm-hmm. But to your point though, it can feel like an annoyance of like, well, how many people do I need to talk to? Either I qualify for the job and there's an interest in the skill that I bring, or I don't. And if this is about connecting with people, I'd love to do that once I have the job. It just
right.
Feels like it's a weird spot. But I that's what I've seen more is like this kind of approach to having more people involved, more connections happening. We've even talked about on our podcast from time to time of like including people in the process. That way they have a chance to understand we've talked a lot about that. But I do think that there's like a sweet spot. I do think that there is there probably needs to be more clarity as far as like what does the process look like up front. I think it'd be smart for companies start to just lay out like this is the process here. You have this amount of interviews, and then if you want to have more conversations, then let them know that that's what it is. And these are meet and greets. These are people that we want you to speak with. They don't necessarily, ask interview questions, but are a part of the process. But I would also say put time parameters around that. Like I don't think that any, role. I don't know. I think some roles probably should take longer, but most roles you should be able to fill and have a decision made within 3 to 4 weeks.
There's a couple things that kind of like keep playing over in my head here. One is that you're spot on about the whole be upfront about what the time process is. Something that you think should take 2 weeks that ends up taking 4 weeks is more annoying than something you're just told up front is going to take 4 weeks, and that this is the process and this is how we'll go through it. So yes, transparency is key there. But I feel like because in a lot of organizations, the trend has been that we take a long time to figure out whether somebody shouldn't be with this organization anymore. I'm not saying that it's either a good thing or a bad thing. In some cases, it's a bad thing. In some cases, it's a good thing. You're expecting more out of people, and you're expecting different skills out of people, and so it might take time to get them to develop skills they may not have had before, because of the changing needs of leadership and a changing workforce. So with that in mind, people should have, whatever the amount of time is, enough time to kind of develop those skills if they weren't expected in the past. But at some point there is a time where you have to say, the train's leaving the station, you need to do this, or you can't be here anymore. And I think because there's been some hesitancy in a lot of organizations to separate people for not having these things, the tendency has been to say, let's make sure we're doing a really good job of hiring the right person to begin with, because it's going to be really hard to get rid of them if we end up not liking them, down the road. So I want to make darn sure that they're the right person to begin with. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. But if you don't know how to hire, how to ask the right questions, and how to get them in front of the right people to get a good sense of what type of an employee they're going to be, whether they are a fit for your organization from a skill set standpoint, from a culture standpoint, if you can't get that quickly, a valid substitute is not, well, let's just have them talk to 70 people and hopefully that'll trip them up if they're trying to hide something. But again, if you're losing candidates because of your process, that's not good either. And so there's got to be this kind of like, let's look at quality over quantity and how to move through this person through the process much more efficiently.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. And it really comes to like questioning, who do you have doing the process? Like, who are the decision makers in the process? And what has their historic record been of talent that they've hired and kind of worked through? Like, I think that's really where, like to your point about the quality over quantity, I would rather have 3 or 4 highly attuned people involved in the process, inclusive of who the person will work for, inclusive of maybe somebody who has shown great success within the organization, and maybe they're not a recruiter or they're not a hiring manager, but they are someone who tends to have a good sense of what's required in the roles. Like, I know it sounds like super simple on the surface, but I just don't know that, like who validates, you know what I mean? Like, people say like somebody's a good recruiter. Well, like, what does that actually mean? Somebody's a good interviewer. What does that actually mean? Is it because they make people feel a certain way? Is it because they're actually assessing talent? Is it because they're capable of reading through the nuance and asking questions and follow-up questions that are both legal but also insightful? Like, I think that makes a lot more sense to me this day and age, to your point, to like get people in through the process quickly, have the talent that's there to assess them and make a selection, and then keep it moving. And because I think that we can get caught up in, are we trying to advance people through a process, or are we trying to eliminate people from the process? And I think that those are two different approaches to hiring. And for a lot of people, I don't even know if they know which one they're doing.
I also think there's another element too that has come into play over the last 10 years, but really more specifically over the last like 2 or 3, and this is a renewed or stronger push toward diversity, equity, and inclusion practices that impact the hiring and promotion process in a lot of organizations, and these kind of additional steps that are being taken by a lot of organizations to ensure that the process aligns with whatever the stated and practice policies of that organization as far as DE&I goes. This is a good thing, but what I think it underscores is the need to make sure that the process of getting candidates in the pipeline to apply becomes all the more important. Because if you are a hiring manager and you want to make sure that you have a talent pool that has applied for this role that also is representative of the diversity, equity, and inclusion standards that your organization is trying to have, and you haven't done a good job of recruiting the right people to apply, then you'll end up lowering your standard for the job in order to meet a standard for DE&I. And why that is not good at all is because it shows that, one, you're not really committed to DE&I. You're saying let's see how we can fit this round peg into a square hole of what we already have, as opposed to saying, hey, there might be a reason certain people don't apply to our organization. Let's figure out why, and let's figure out how to make them want to apply to begin with. Because if you do the right steps in terms of getting the candidate pool where it needs to be, you will find the right talent and it will work with your DE&I standards. But if you don't do it at the beginning, I think it's a lot harder to.
Yeah, well, I think anytime that you go into a selection process with any type of intent of like, this is what we need from a DE&I standpoint and not from a talent, skill, and competence standpoint, like you're already starting off on kind of a bad foot.
Right, but a lot of people are reacting because they've already been on a bad foot.
Correct, right, exactly.
Yes.
For decades, right?
For decades,
yes. of not having the right talent, not recruiting the right talent, not challenging themselves to find better talent, not being, aware of their teams and the communities and mirroring the communities. Like you've got a lot of years behind but definitely not doing the right thing in regards to like figuring this stuff out. Right. And now people are getting desperate to a degree. And I think that to your point, like that causes just as much damage. Because you never want to take a job because you feel like you're just checking a box for a company. Right? Like that doesn't bring anybody joy. It's not fulfilling. It doesn't feel good. But you should, as somebody who's looking at working for a company as well, those are data points that you want to know, and whether or not you can go to the company, walk around the office, go check things out, know people that work there. Like these are all things that I think are really important when you're looking for a place to land. But that is absolutely the responsibility of not just a recruiting team, but also every single C-level executive, every single talent manager, every single leader of teams, like to truly build a pipeline that allows you to have a great, diverse, talent pool to choose from. Requires everybody doing their part and pushing back against status quo and getting creative with finding different ways to attract talent to the organization. But I think it also means that if you're struggling with this, or a company is struggling with this, and it's creating this space where, to get back to like the point of the show, like all of these interviews or all these partners that you want people to talk to because you're trying to figure this out for the company, you're trying to make sure that you're reducing or eliminating systemic bias that may exist in your interview process. I think it's imperative that you're upfront with some of your candidates that this is, in fact, we know this is an opportunity for the organization, and we are being intentional in doing our part to fill our pipeline with great talent, so that when we are making selections based on skill and competence, we are capable of building diverse teams by doing it the right way.
Right. I totally agree with that. I think in a lot of organizations, the number of interviewers in the process is still too high. And if that's the case, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to sacrifice the quality of who those interviewers are in order to get the right number in there. So the right number of interviewers is done by making sure that the person who actually has to lead this person is at least involved in part of the process, or is the final decision maker. But the kind of the initial screening steps should be done by someone outside of that to make sure that, hey, you know what? There's no chance that the person who is the actual hiring manager just called up a buddy and said, hey, I know you can work for me, come work for me. And that's what you're ultimately trying to avoid. If the final person who makes that decision is given a list of exact people to choose from that have all met the standards of what the job is looking for, and now you're trying to see like a fit for the team itself, I think that's safe to do, because it removes the actual hiring manager decision maker from that initial screening. Everybody who's gotten past this particular screening to get to that point now kind of meets that standard. But it's when a person can go out and recruit and find people that aren't just for the organization as a whole, but for their own specific team. That's when the appearance of impropriety can show up, and that's when the kind of interview process starts to expand and get longer and longer. But you have to remember, in a lot of those situations, they are a formality in order to give the appearance of propriety, when in actuality the decision is still made for the wrong reasons. So if I go out and recruit a friend and say, come apply, we like the organization, but you're going to have to go interview through these 8 people first. If 6 of the 8 people could say, I have no idea why we'd ever have this guy in this organization, and then I can still, as the hiring manager, go, yeah, I like him anyway, let's just bring him in. That's no different than having them not talk to those people to begin with, right? So it's not just about, the appearance of making sure that you're reducing systemic bias in the individual hiring managers. It's actually reducing it by having the right people in that screening process.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us this episode's 1 Minute Hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
The 1 Minute Hack.
All right, for this episode's 1 Minute Hack, here's what I want you to do. Most people listening right now probably aren't in charge of the end-to-end hiring process for their organization. You don't get to necessarily pick what it is. You're probably a piece of that mechanism that has to work, and you have to execute a lot of what the company strategies are. What you do have control over, however, is the communication that you have with the candidates, whether you found them or not, to make sure that they stay engaged in the process and they don't feel like they are being kind of left behind or looked over, that they feel like they're being engaged, even if the process takes longer than normal. There's nothing wrong with saying to a candidate, I know this process is taking longer than maybe you were hoping it would be. We're taking steps to make sure we get the right people in. And I want to know that if they decide to move forward with you, that it's because you're the right person for this job. I understand if you can't hang, but I would love it if you did. And just being upfront with people about how long the process is going to take and what the next steps are, reaching out periodically to make sure they're still engaged with you, that can do a lot for ensuring that you don't get through a hiring process only to find out that your candidate of choice has already taken a job somewhere else 2 weeks ago because you took too long to schedule something or get the next thing scheduled.
Yeah, I think it's a great 1 minute hack. And to your point, like I don't know that as much as we enjoy talking about leadership and our opinions and perspectives here, that we're going to change the world and how many interviews people have now.
Right.
It seems like there's a lot of dialogue about it. I think there's a lot of reasons that companies are saying that this is what they want to be able to do. So I think that for the time being, that's exactly what leaders should be doing, is being very very communicative with candidates, especially those that you feel strongly about or that you're trying to recruit to your organization, being as upfront as you possibly can, giving them as much insight as possible in regards to the timelines and that type of thing, so that there's nothing worse than feeling like I don't know where I stand or what's going on. And so having somebody, to say, hey, want to let you know, this is an ongoing process. You've not been forgotten. This is what this looks like. This is kind of the updates. And again, if that can't be you for whatever the reason is, then make sure that you follow up with the recruiting manager or the person that's the hiring manager to make sure that they are in fact staying close to the candidates. It's just I think it's going to require a little bit more effort on the leader side to make sure that we are advocating for the people that potentially could be working for us and with us.
Right. The last thing I want to kind of add to this topic is that a lot of times the culture in your organization, as far as employees making recommendations or referrals for people to get hired, a lot of times you can kind of use that as a litmus test to figure out how good the culture is when it comes to hiring. On one end, it could be that if you're not getting a lot of people who apply and they say that they applied because of a referral from an employee that's already there, if that's not happening a lot, it could mean, in a worst case scenario, that your current employees don't like where they work enough to say to their friends, come work here. That's a worst case scenario. But what it could also be is that if you have a culture in your organization that kind of makes people feel like they did something wrong by referring somebody who ended up not being a good fit for the organization, either they got hired and they got fired 6 months later, or if they went through 3 interviews and ended up not getting hired, if they feel like they shouldn't tell people to apply because of the way they're being treated when something doesn't work out, that's never a good thing. So instead of kind of chastising people or making them feel like they did something wrong, instead, the culture should be about rewarding people who end up, finding a person who gets hired and ends up being a great person with the organization. Reward people who do that and let the bygones be bygones. If a person gets hired and they're the wrong person, to believe that it's the referral person who caused that problem, especially if that person went through 7 interviews to get there, that's absolutely ridiculous. They just made a referral and that's it. So let it go and focus on the wins and not the losses.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.